Thanks, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Greg Tananbaum. I'll obviously be talking about this NISO open access metadata and indicators. I'll also, I hope you know that there's an acronym quiz at the end of this, so I'll be proctoring that, and hopefully everyone's been taking ample notes and studying up on that. I'm going to dig in just real quickly, not give too much background about myself, and talk mainly about the project. NISO in late 2012 formed a working group to study the issue of how best to create an open access metadata and indicator solution. And it's co-chaired by Cameron Nayland from PLOS, Ed Pence from Crossref, and myself. I'm actually a consultant, but I've been working for 5 or 6 years with Spark as one of my clients, and so I'm representing them in this capacity. And the goal of the project is, as you can see, to develop a standardized set of metadata elements that tie together accessibility permissions to an object in a manner that is useful to both humans and to machines. So basically, what our aim is to make it easier for readers and for researchers to understand what their access rights are for individual articles. And the expectation is that this would be crafted in such a way that publishers and indexers and search engines and libraries and funding bodies and other actors in the research chain would be able to easily implement it. In terms of why this is necessary, I think there are sort of 3 strands that weave together to speak to why the time is right for something like this. The first one is the proliferation of open access. We see that it's the fastest growing segment of the journal market. There's a recent Outsell report that validates that. Also, some of the work that Lasko and Bjork have done talk about the size of the market that it now encompasses. It's about 12% of Scopus and ISI indexed content is open access, and that number is growing pretty rapidly year over year. So that's one strand. The second strand is this sort of alphabet soup of public access mandates. So you have all these funding bodies around the world, NIH obviously being one, the Research Councils UK being another one, that are saying if you take money from us for your research, you are, as a condition of that, going to have to make your content available either immediately or within 6 months or within 12 months of it being published in a journal article, or in a journal, excuse me. And Biomed Central actually maintains quite a good list of what those funder policies are, the URLs available to you there. So that's the second strand. And then the third strand is the growth of these hybrid publishing options. So the notion that there are traditional journals, subscription-based journals, and they're offering authors the choice to make their individual articles open access by paying a fee and unlocking those articles. And as of the time I sat down to write this slide a week or 2 ago, or this presentation, there are 176 publishers around the world that offer this type of option. And again, there's a link where you can see all of the different publishers and go off and examine all their different policies. So if you take that dramatic growth in the number of open access publications, and then you mix in this requirement that a growing number of funding bodies are implementing to compel the grant recipients to make their outputs available either immediately or after some embargo, and then you also factor in this increase in hybrid publications where some articles within a journal are closed access and others are open access, I think that becomes a good breeding ground for this initiative. So there's lots of open access. It's rolled out in different ways, even within a given publisher or within a given journal. It's rolled out inconsistently and in sometimes a confusing fashion. And that can make it difficult for readers and for authors and for funders and for others to understand just what rights are associated with any given article. The basic problem is there's confusion with respect to who can do what, when, with a given article. And our hope is that the project, this NISO project, will go a large way to untangle this confusion. So in terms of who we intend to serve with this project, these are some broad categories of impacted parties. We actually have a NISO work item which talks about some of these things in more detail, and I'll have a URL at the end that you can go and take a look and read in more detail. But you think about readers who are trying, as I said, understand what they can do with a given article. You think about authors who are trying to determine what rights they have with respect to what they can go off and do with this content, and also if they're trying to demonstrate compliance with the research funder's policy. You think about publishers who want to convey what an audience can and can't do with a given article. The research funders who have these policies, and they're trying to determine the extent to which there is compliance or there's non-compliance. Third parties, search engines, A&I databases, knowledge bases, and other discovery services that are hoping to guide audiences towards resources that that audience can actually use. So if there is an article within a constellation of subscription-based content, a single article is freely available after an embargo or because the author went through the hybrid model, the engines would like to be able to convey that information so the user knows to go and read it, or that they have the ability to go and read it. And of course, the libraries fall into that last category as well. They're trying to efficiently direct their patrons to resources that they can use. And so being able to determine which articles fall into that would certainly be beneficial. To drill down just a little bit further into use cases, again, these are examples only. It's not meant to be comprehensive. I'll talk about where we are in the process with NISO, but we have a working group, and we're trying to really drill down and create a universe of use cases to understand how this tool can and should be used. But again, end users, talking about end users who are going to Google or Google Scholar or EBSCOhost, whatever it may be. Right now, again, the indicator for open access is typically at the journal level or the publisher level if it's Biomed Central or PLOS. But we're seeing increasingly that within a journal, some content is publicly available, some content is not. And so how we deal with those hybrid articles, how we deal with those embargoed articles, that's something that needs to be dealt with some sort of specification. Talking about in a classroom setting, so there's an instructor who wants to reuse part of an article for teaching or for some activity, and there's very little data on reuse rights that's easily discoverable at an article level. So what can I do with it? Not just can I read it, but can I do something with it? And along those lines, this is a smaller audience, but it's an important one, is text mining. So right now it's very difficult and it's very labor intensive for text miners to understand the permissions that are associated with any given article. Universities have an interest in this. So when we think about an institutional repository, what articles can be deposited and under what conditions, and what rights are associated with those articles. Funding agencies, as I mentioned before, you're thinking about Research Councils UK says you have to make this content available publicly after a certain amount of time. They want to make sure that that actually happens. How can they track it? Discovery engines I talked about before, the user has an interest in being able to discover content to which they have access. The engines that drive that discovery process also have an interest in making that happen, of course. And then publishers, I said there's a degradation of terms and conditions as articles move downstream away from the publisher. So on the publisher site, in the moment, it can be very clear, hopefully it can be made clear, what someone can do with this article, whether they can read it or not. But as that article sort of passes through the ecosystem, there's a degradation in terms of being able to understand what someone can or can't do with it. In terms of who's involved, we actually have a working group right now. There's, 15 or 16 people, plus Cameron, Ned, and myself, and we're trying to represent various segments, various stakeholders that I sort of outlined broadly before. You can see the names that are associated with that. We also, we have we're trying to get, the idea is to try and get input from a wide range of actors that bring a wide range of experiences to the issue. We also have a wider group, a review group of about 37 people not listed here, and we get their feedback on key points, key issues at key junctures of the project. This group, we talk every other week. We have a conference call. Attendance has been great, so most people are there most of the time. They're actively involved. It's not just something they put on their CVs. They're offering quite valuable input and already have helped shape the project in quite a positive way. Here's the timeline so you can just see where we are. The proposal was approved earlier this year. We convened the working group, created the work plan. We're now in the information gathering stage, and this is sort of the long slog of the project, is trying to figure out who it is we're trying to help, how we can help them, what is practical, what is feasible, what the scholarly communication world will actually accept in terms of how ambitious we should be. Our hope is that we'll have an initial draft by the fall. And then it'll be open for at least a month for public comment and feedback, so hopefully all of you will have a chance to look at it and strengthen it. We'll then deliver it to NYSO by the end of the year with a hope that they will discuss it and adopt it sometime in 2014. In terms of what we're thinking about here, what our challenges are. Again, we're trying to make it easy at an article level for someone to understand the readership and reuse rights that are associated with that article. We're trying to make it easy to transmit that in a way that can be understood by machines, that can be understood by humans, that may or may not have a mark associated with it or some sort of text, so that there is no mistaking who can do what when with the article. I just want to underscore that that's what we're trying to accomplish. I realize that's a fairly important point, and I may have brushed over it a little too quickly. In terms of the challenges, how do we address embargoes? That's a critical one. So Jason actually talked about this a little bit in some of the KBART work that they're doing. But there are articles that are behind a paywall, and maybe they're behind a paywall for 6 months or for 12 months, and then they're free to read. Highwire is a great example, has a lot of content that falls into that type of model. So, in other words, what are the access conditions that are associated with an article, and do those access conditions change over time? We need some way to be able to represent that it's embargoed now, but in 6 months it's going to be free, or in 30 days it's going to be free. What do we do about the sub-elements of an article? So certain components, a figure, or a table, or a photo within an article may, in fact, have different license restrictions than the overall article. So a scholar might want to use a visual element from some article. The overall article has a CC BY license associated with it, but the sub-elements may have some entirely different set of restrictions. And that's almost never is that marked in a clear fashion. So do we even want to get into that thicket? Can we get into that thicket? Reuse issues. So in terms of who can read an article, that's easier to determine who can read it. The license usually conveys that fairly clearly, but what can people do with it beyond reading? What are the reuse rights that are associated with an article? So open access is obviously about more than just readership. When we talk about reuse, our group needs to figure out how we can encapsulate reuse information, particularly when that information is not always neatly conveyed by the creator or by the publisher of the work. Our plan is that we will deliver to NYSO a recommendation for a specified format for bibliographic metadata, and possibly, not definitely, possibly a set of visual and textual signals to describe the readership rights associated with a single journal article. So we want to figure out if there's a way that, almost like Crossmark, what is being done there, if there's in effect a badge that someone can look at and see it and know, okay, I can read this, or I can use it, or I can do X, Y, Z with it. We also don't just want to say, okay, well, here's the standard. We want to talk about how this can be adopted, how this will be taken up by the community. Within that, we need, again, very specifically to think carefully about the reuse rights component of this. And if we determine that, in fact, there is a way to deal with that, we'll incorporate that into the report. And then we're developing all these use cases, as I said. We want to use those not just to guide our thinking, but we want to then circle back to them and say, and here is how this standard that we are proposing will in fact address, hopefully will address, those use cases that we have called on. If we're successful in what we do, the open access metadata indicator will make access rights, journal article access rights, portable in a manner that I think, as the slide says, will make discovery and tracking and readership and hopefully reuse straightforward for all the parties in the scholarly communication system. And that's all I have. So I'm happy to answer any questions. There's a URL that I put up here. It's our sort of workspace. This is very much a work in progress in terms of where we are. But what we do, the notes from our meetings and so forth, are all stored there. And I encourage you to go take a look and offer some feedback.
Thank you.
So questions?
Well, I actually have one.
Please.
This actually segues well into what I'm going to be talking about next about supplemental materials, but are you looking at reuse rules for just the main article itself, or all of the attendant components and data and all of those things?
Can you repeat that?
So the question is, are we looking at reuse rights for just the main article or for all of the subcomponents like the supplemental data or supplementary materials and so forth? And the answer is, we are looking at all of them. As I mentioned in sort of the, when I alluded to there sometimes being a disparity between the rights of sub-elements and the rights of the whole, I don't know, quite honestly, I don't know where that's going to go in our thinking. It may be that it is something we can find an elegant solution to. It may be something that we have to kick the can down the road a little bit.
Or
Bert.
another committee.
Do you see any kind of coordination here with the UK efforts in the same direction? Because it seems like in terms of roadmap, they seem to be, well, multi-year ahead.
So the question is whether there's any coordination that we might see with the UK efforts, and there are definitely a number of global initiatives. There are a number of initiatives. KBARD is an example where there is an intersection, and one of the challenges we have is to do this in a way that is not duplicative and doesn't create a Tower of Babel of acronyms and standards. That is largely the purview of NISO's leadership, for better or for worse. They're pretty confident, they are confident that this will complement what's happening in the UK as opposed to create additional confusion. Other questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you.